Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Catherine Heldy, and I'm the Chief Scientific Officer at Syngap Research Fund. Today is February 6, 2025, and we will be hearing from the Medical Director of Beacon Biosignals, Jay Pathmanathan, MD, PhD, in a talk titled Dreem EEG Headband to Assess Sleep EEG Biomarkers in SYNGAP1. We are so pleased to have Jay Pathmanathan describe an upcoming trial run by Beacon Biosignals, which many of you may have heard already at our conference in December 2024. Jay will have a more extensive description of that same information. Jay is an expert in all the aspects of creating a better way to measure and use EEG data. We don't have time to list all his achievements and qualifications, but I'll highlight a few diverse skill sets that have convinced me he is the perfect person to solve the problem of measuring what is going on in brains in a non-invasive, low-barrier way while people are at home with their caregivers. We can start with his clinical expertise. He's board certified in neurology, epilepsy, and intraoperative monitoring. He's medical director of EEG laboratories and ICU monitoring at UPenn. And besides being an expert clinical neurophysiologist, he has extensive knowledge of instrumentation and electrodiagnostic skills. He's an engineer, which is needed to build a new reliable device. His education is so extensive as to be a teacher. We can add supervisor and mentor to 8 postgraduate physician trainees and instructors per year, and training and supervisor of over 40 EEG technologists. We need to include his successes in application development. He's developed and maintained the clinical tools for EEG interpretation, management, and billing in use at the University of Pennsylvania to manage over 8,000 studies per year and achieve a 30% increase in operations. And of course, he also has experience in running clinical trials. He's been on multiple studies as a PI, co-PI, sub-I, and has experience in protocol development and FDA communications. Is the person we need to create a clinical measure for SYNGAP1 related disorder that can be used in clinical trials to measure changes in brain activity in people getting treatments. A recorded version of this webinar will be available on the SRF website under webinars, under the news and events menu. The link is curesyngap1.org/webinars. Please put your questions in the Q&A and we will answer the questions live at the end of the presentation. For those of you just joining us, welcome. And our speaker today is Jay Pathmanathan, MD, PhD, and his presentation is titled Dreem EEG Headband to Assess Sleep EEG Biomarkers in SYNGAP1. Here's Jay.
Thank you, Catherine. It's good to be back. I really enjoyed joining everyone at the conference. Anyone who wasn't at the conference hasn't seen this before. I'm really going to be talking about a trial that we're conducting actually with the SRF. I should have put SRF on this slide, but I didn't get permission. Sure, you guys would like that, but this is really a team effort. And Catherine, you're too kind. I will just 2 correction points. I am definitely not expert enough to do all of those things, but fortunately, I work with an amazing team that includes everyone at SRF, everyone at Beacon, and a lot of other academics. And jointly, we all recognize the problems that you guys face, which is SYNGAP, amongst other genetic DEs. These are tough diseases. We don't have the therapy we want, not even close, but it's on the horizon. And if we can improve diagnostics, improve biomarkers, we can help facilitate the people who are developing the drugs that are really going to be revolutionary. And we're so close. So actually, I'm no longer at Penn. What happened was I moved back to Boston at the end of COVID. And while I was moving, I was thinking about what I wanted to do. And I'm an adult epileptologist. And it really does strike me how we are just lacking in these therapies that are really going to be game changers, even though the technology is approaching the point where we could have that therapy. And I reconnected with a bunch of my colleagues when I was at Harvard. A bunch of my colleagues from my Harvard days had started this tiny little biotech startup called Beacon, and the mission was to help facilitate the development of therapies in neurology that we really needed. And I was really inspired by their efforts. And so I joined that team, and I really think that we are on the cusp of making some revolutionary changes. And when I say we, I mean the entire pharma, life science, biotech, academia, the entire spectrum of all of those players, just about there. So I'm very hopeful. And so I'm going to talk to you today about brief overview of some of the problems in that space. What do we need, and how does EEG fit in? And that's going to lead into a trial that I want to talk about. Okay. So this should come as no surprise. I do work for Beacon Biosignals, which makes me heavily biased. We're not worth a lot, so I don't think I'm that biased, but I'm really inspired by trying to get the tools we need to get to that next milestone. But just understand that I do have equity in Beacon Biosignals. As I mentioned, we're going to get to this study. We are working with the team at SRF to really get this off the ground. And there are several other partners involved in the study. It's not just Beacon. I can't tell you who they are today, but they're pharma partners. This study is going to be the culmination of a lot of joint effort. I think it's really going to help to develop some tooling that's going to be needed for the trials we really want. And so I think this is going to be a really important set of work that we're going to be embarking on. And it really does require your help. And that's why I wanted to tell you about this. But I also wanted to tell you about why you might want to participate. And I know the Syngap community is very invested. So I don't even need to do this, but because when I came to the conference, folks were just running up to me saying, we want to do whatever we can to help. So inspiring, but I still think it's useful to understand some of this because there's going to be many trials. So it'll be useful to just understand where this trial fits in. Okay. So I showed this at the conference, and I think it touched a nerve, or at least it resonated with a lot of the parents out there. And I understand, even though I'm part of the problem, I understand. So stop me if you've heard this. More EEG won't be helpful, right? Your doctor telling me this. I know you've heard this. The EEG results, we don't know what to do with them. They were indeterminate. Abnormal, don't know what to do with them. EEG didn't show anything. What does that mean? Did you see any brain activity? Didn't show anything. We didn't see anything. There was a lot of blank, spikes, seizures, slowing, something. But there's nothing to do. We're not going to change the medications at all, right? How do these things work? I mean, none of these statements really make sense. Don't blame your doctor. They're only human. And these are all things that I have said to my patients. So every neurologist is out there saying, right? And I totally get it from a patient's perspective, from a scientist's perspective, from a neurologist's perspective. How can that be the case, right? Fundamentally, we're looking at diseases in which there is a problem at some basic level. SYNGAP, it's a genetic problem, as you all know. It could be a problem in a protein. It could be a problem in some other chemical in the body, in the brain. It could be a structural problem, but there's some fundamental problem, and it ultimately results in clinical outcomes that you can see as parents, right? Your kids have X seizures, developmental delay, something, right? And if EEG, if neurophysiological testing is a way to look at brain activity, shouldn't it pick up those problems? And of course, the answer is yes. So why can't we use it to really quantify those problems? And there's several difficulties, and I'm going to dive into this in some detail because I think it's worth understanding where those difficulties lie today and how we're going to get to a place in the future where this is improved. First off, it's difficult to get EEG data. It's costly, both in terms of time and money, and your efforts, and the hassle and irritation for your kids. It's difficult to interpret EEG. There's a lot of abnormalities. Some of those abnormalities, I'm going to show you some features of the EEG, but some of those abnormalities are obvious. You can just see it and say, okay, that's not supposed to be there. But then quantifying those abnormalities is incredibly difficult. And then interpreting the quantification is extra difficult. So even if we got the EEG, are we able to really score it, to pinpoint how much of a problem it is? And then even if we could do all those things, and we had a biomarker, a feature of the EEG that told you something definitive, how well established are those biomarkers? And as you're going to see, they're not. They're not studied today. They're not studied well enough to be definitive and say this feature is bad news in SYNGAP. We're not there yet, but we're getting. All right, so this is what an EEG should look like, and I'm not going to go through it in much detail, but just kind of keep this in the back of your mind. If you look carefully, there's these sets of rows. There's a row up here. There's a second row, a third row, a fourth row, and then a smaller row down here. And these bottom two are monitoring the eyes. Okay, and then there's the EKG channel. If you look in each row, you'll notice there's some fast squiggly stuff at the top, and then some slower oscillations towards the back, and that's kind of what I want to see. That's called an AP gradient. Again, you don't have to be an EEG expert, but this would be a normal 3-year-old's EEG. Sorry, neurotypical 3-year-old's EEG. Okay. This might be your EEG. This is a neurotypical adult EEG. And you can right off the bat, you can see some differences. Oh, that doesn't look quite the same. But some of the features, that front to back organization, still there, but it's a little bit more flat than it was before. Yep. Okay. All of that looks okay. How's this EEG? This is a very different EEG, and I think you can all appreciate that this does not look like neurotypical 3-year-old, neurotypical 50-year-old. It looks different, right? And right off the bat, the background, the overall pattern of the background is different. There's a lot of these slow waves. There's 1, 2 within this 1 second block. There's a lot of that slow activity. It's kind of everywhere. It's not, we call that organization. It's not well organized. And then even more concerningly are these spiky things, this spiky component in a slow wave. These are the epileptiform discharges you might read about in your in a report that you've gotten. And then these discharges are repeating, and in some ways they're kind of organized. This is not a seizure, but it is a concerning set of patterns. And it is definitely a set of patterns that I would say this person has epilepsy and likely has a significant neurological disorder. Okay, so here might be a report that you might get back from that EEG. Abnormal, disorganized background, epileptiform discharges. The discharges are organized as generalized periodic discharges. Don't worry about the formal terminology. But they're not necessarily seizures, but concerning enough that maybe more EEG might be useful. However, clinical correlation advised. What does that mean, right? That doesn't tell you necessarily about what's going to happen in the future. It's concerning. It gives you a diagnosis, but it doesn't tell you some of the features you might want to know. And if this is not the first EEG, let's say there was another EEG that had all of these features, then is this EEG better or worse? And oftentimes reports won't say that. And I'm guilty of that all the time. We should, actually, neurologists should try to say EEG is improved, EEG is worse than prior. But it can be very difficult to actually score that in actual practice. The other thing is that patterns aren't necessarily obvious, right? So I drew out some spiky components here on the EEG. They're not all the same, right? This one is really spiky, and this one's kind of smaller and blunted. And how about this one over here? There's this kind of rounded thing. Is that a discharge? And that's that's what happens in real world EEG. There's a lot of variety in the EEG, and that comes up when humans read. So in work that one of the founders of Beacon performed, and actually I was part of the study, he got 8 neurologists to look at thousands of pages of EEG and score them. And this was a ton of effort. And what panned out, the interesting thing is, there are some patterns, and these are just little segments of EEG, some patterns that every single neurologist, and these are all specialized epileptologists, so just like your loved one's neurologist, like the expert neurologist you see for SYNGAP, that level of neurologists. These aren't neurologists who know much about MS or necessarily Alzheimer's or things like that, but they know epilepsy and they know EEG. There are some patterns that all 8 of these neurologists could identify and say, yep, that's definitely an epileptiform discharge. And then there were some patterns that all of them agreed this is definitely not an epileptiform discharge. But in between, there's lots of patterns where some of them called it, but not everyone. And if you look at all of the patterns together, you'll note that that some epileptologists really they kind of called everything a discharge. So this epileptologist here with the represented in the blue circles, they're calling 6 out of every 8 discharges, or 6 out of every 8 features an epileptiform discharge, even when most of their colleagues did not. So they're calling 6 out of 8 things an epileptiform discharge, and only one person, they're the one that's calling it, right? On the flip side, some epileptologists they're really only calling an epileptiform discharge when everyone is calling it, right? So in other words, some of these doctors are overcallers and some are undercallers. And in the ideal world, you get all of these 8 people together, and you have them vote and discuss and come up with a consensus. And that consensus would fall on this dotted line. But what you'll see is that no single human follows that dotted line perfectly. Some are closer than others, but no single human is really on the dotted line. And I'm one of these lines. I'm not going to tell you which one I am. It's probably a bad sign. It gets even tougher, right? Some features are really dramatic. This is actually a picture of features that have been described in SYNGAP, okay? You can get these really prominent, this blue box is a really prominent polyspike in wave discharge. This is striking. I think everyone could pick this up. But then there are these more subtle features, right? Where the red arrow is. These relatively smaller, spiky, but not quite as spiky features. And these are in the back of the head. This is in the occipital lobe. And many of you have heard this. SYNGAP is associated with interesting and somewhat unique. It's not strictly related to SYNGAP, but you don't see this that often. Occipital discharges, right? But how many abnormalities, even if you could identify these features, which isn't definitely true, this is relatively new finding. This paper is from 2024. Let's say you identified this. How many abnormalities are on this page? And I draw you back to the problem with humans. Well, if it's this human out here, this person out here that's represented by the blue circles, they're probably going to look at this and say there's 100 discharges here. Whereas the person in the dark blue circles is going to look at this and say maybe 3, right? And you get very different answers. And that makes it really difficult to score EEG. One person is going to look at either of these EEGs and say, there's a small number of abnormalities. And another person is going to say there's a huge number. And then how do you compare across different disorders? These aren't the same disorder. This is SYNGAP. See, here we go, laser pointer. Here is SYNGAP, and this is a different developmental epileptic encephalopathy. This is one of the sodium channel mutations. I forget which one. So how can you really grade this? Right? And they don't necessarily show the same features. The SYNGAP EEG doesn't have the same background abnormalities, doesn't have all of that slowing activity, but this sodium channelopathy does have a lot of that. The SYNGAP EEG actually has more epileptiform features than the sodium channelopathy, but the SYNGAP EEG, the epileptiform features are more consolidated. How could you grade that? How could you say which one is worse? And I am going to tell you that I actually have an opinion on this. I could look at this and say, I think I do have an opinion on which one's worse, but I still wouldn't write that down. I wouldn't tell you. I wouldn't put that in my report. I wouldn't say to you, oh, this one is worse. And that's actually what I think. This one is worse because I don't have enough data. I don't have enough experience to know that for sure. It's just based on all of the patients I've seen and all the EEGs I've seen in my own experience, which isn't enough to formally make a written conclusion, unfortunately. Right. By the way, how long would it take to make those conclusions? This might take many minutes to look and really count all of these abnormalities. An epileptologist on service, that means that the one who's responsible for all the EEGs and all the phone calls and all the patients in clinic, might have to look at 90,000 of these pages. This is one page. They, in a single day, might be responsible for looking at about 90,000 pages of EEG. And that was about the average when I was on EEG service when I was at UPenn. And yeah, UPenn is a big institution and it's a really busy one. So yeah, CHOP, adult hospital at UPenn, that may not be quite as busy, or that might be busier than maybe some practices, but I guarantee you, your neurologist is probably in this ballpark, right? Whoever you see who's your expert in SYNGAP probably is looking at about that much EEG per day. So there's no way they can invest a ton of time counting things and really, really diving in. Because of those limitations, EEG has things that it can be used for and things that it's not really good for. Generally, it's good for the initial diagnosis. Epilepsy, yes or no? Okay, well, there are some discharges here, so epilepsy, yes, that's pretty straightforward, right? Start a medication. EEG is pretty good at that. It's not bad for confirming the presence of events. You saw your child do something, but you're not sure if it's a seizure. I'm not sure if it's a seizure. Okay, you're seeing that every day. Let's get an EEG. If we don't see anything on the EEG, it's probably not a seizure, right? It's not bad for that. There are limitations. The EEG can be wrong. You can be wrong. I can be wrong. But it's a pretty good way of assessing. This happens a lot. You come in and say, listen, I haven't seen any seizure activity. But of course, you have to sleep. So you're not watching 24/7. It's not humanly possible. And you know that your child has had seizures at night. So you want to cut back on the medicine. That's very reasonable. Let's do an EEG to just make sure there aren't unrealized seizures, frequent unrealized seizures. Yeah, that's reasonable. Or you haven't seen any abnormalities. There's room to increase the meds, but we don't want to do that unless it's necessary. And, you know, I think that milestones should have been met that aren't being met. Well, seizures could explain that. Maybe we should do an EEG to check for that. That's not an unreasonable use of EEG. And all of these things, it's pretty good. Is it perfect? No, because you're only going to get your whatever it's going to be, 20 minutes, 1 day, 2 days, probably not more than 3 days of EEG. And that's even a stretch, right? Unfortunately, it's not very good at quantifying the degree of abnormality. Yeah, we can assess roughly how many seizures there are. There's a lot more to the EEG than seizures, as you guys were well aware, right? What about the background? What about the interictal epileptiform discharge? Not the seizures, just the little spikes and sharps and the features that are abnormal, the brain sparking away, but there's no clinical science with those. Those can't be good for the brain. We all agree on that, but we don't have a good way of counting all of those. We don't have a really great way of assessing whether medication really worked. Unless it changed the seizure burden, which I can count pretty easily, I'm not going to be able to assess if there's a subtle improvement in the background frequencies. I can't really do that. As a human, I can't really do that. Subtle change in the number of background discharges. I mean, just this page alone probably has 30 discharges. What if it went from 30 to 29? There's no way I could tell you that. And then this is a real problem. Real problem. Are you on too much medication? I see this all the time. In fact, I would say the majority of patients that I have gotten over the years transfer from a pediatric clinic, in my opinion, have been on too many medications. And I'm not blaming anyone because it's very difficult and there's a trade-off, right? There's a trade-off between the side effects of medication, which is sedation and cognitive impairment, and seizures. So you cut back on those medicines, you're going to have more seizures. But sometimes it's worth it if you can wake someone up and they're more interactive. And that's a tough thing to assess for. So I don't know what the right answer is. Maybe the EEG could help us, but we can't really quantify it visually by human inspection. And then we really can't do this. Look at an EEG. Well, I shouldn't say we really can't. I'm really hesitant to ever make an opinion on this, even if I have an idea in the back of my mind. If I look at an EEG and I think I know, I'm never going to say it out loud. Looking at this EEG, do I think your child will be able to do blank, speak, walk, throw a ball, any of those things? We really should, I think we should not be using EEG with visual inspection to make those calls, though I suspect that there is some insight to be gained from EEG if we could really do the studies to really understand that better. Right. So what we really want is a quantitative number to tell us not just abnormal, mildly abnormal, moderately abnormal, all those silly words that I use all the time and annoys everyone, including myself. I can't emphasize this enough. Neurologists understand these limitations. They're not just trying to be jerks. Maybe we are jerks, but we understand the limitations. But these are human limitations. We need quantitative tools. And I think every neurologist who reads EEG would agree with that assessment, right? Nobody is out there saying, "Oh, I'm as good as computers. I can quantify things better than a machine." No, I don't think anyone who really looks at EEG would ever say that. All right, so that's a good transition into biomarkers. That's really what I'm getting at, biomarkers. So what is a biomarker? This is a direct quote from a paper. This is not a this paper is not actually specific to neurology, but biomarkers are not specific to neurology. They're not specific to neuroscience, to epilepsy at all. Across the board, every area of medicine needs biomarker. So biomarker, the word is a portmanteau of biological marker. So your word of the day is, or my word of the day is portmanteau. I love it, portmanteau. I think I knew that word, but when I came across this, I was like, oh, that's cool, portmanteau. But if you can have two words of the day, biomarker should be your second word of the day. Many of you already know what a biomarker is, but I think it's worth just going into the exact definition. It's a broad subcategory of medical signs, and a medical sign is just any objective piece of information that tells me something about your medical state, and then that piece of information can be measured accurately, objectively, and reproducibly. Okay, so it can't just be something like I don't really feel right today. That's not going to be a biomarker because that's not objective and reproducible. But a biomarker could be something like I have a headache and I'm grading it as a 7, right? That may be a reproducible sign, a reproducible measure. It depends on how accurate you are. So as you can imagine, the ideal biomarker is something that I can measure objectively without your subjective input. So currently, we're using your reported seizure burden, right? That's what most trials are using. But you obviously know the problem with that. As good as you are, and you are the best reporters out there in the world of neurology. I'm an adult epileptologist, so I ask my own patients, hey, how many seizures have you had? And I never trust the answer because a lot of patients don't know when they've had a seizure. A lot of patients might assume something is a seizure, but it's not, because when you have seizures, you worry about a lot of things, right? A lot of people are forgetting things or twitching, right? I twitch all the time, but that doesn't mean it was a seizure. But if you have seizures, then you might worry about that. So we know that self-reported seizures or parent-reported seizures, and parent-reported seizures are better than other patients' self-reported seizures, but they're still not perfect. So could we use EEG as an objective biomarker? And even if we can, there's different types of biomarkers. CDER, which is the group within the FDA that really governs drug development. And so CDER is the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research. So they're really the ones setting the rules and deciding how a trial is going to be conducted and what biomarkers will be allowed. CDER defines 7 types of biomarkers. I'm not going to go into this into incredible depth, but if you're curious, you can just Google CDER and biomarker, and you'll come across the page that defines all of these different types. But I will show you how these things could be relevant, and I'm going to try to show you that in terms of how it's relevant to you in particular, and me in particular. All right, so why do you care? Why do I care? And I think we can summarize this with this picture. And you absolutely cannot ask me any questions on this. This is well outside of my area of expertise. My area of expertise is squiggly lines, and not squiggly lines like DNA. I'm talking about EEG. I can answer questions about EEG, but do not ask me about ASOs. But you actually may know more about ASOs than I do. But the bottom line is this could be revolutionary for all of us, right? This could be the therapy I want, because let's be honest, the therapy I have for you today is not adequate. It is not working. Well, it can suppress seizures, but it's not going to do the things that I want you to have, you want your kids to have. It's not there yet, right? So this is potentially the answer. And it doesn't have to be ASO. You could replace ASO with anything that is manipulating this process. So the process is you have DNA, which is the instructions on how to make proteins, and those proteins are the building blocks of you and I and your kids and everyone, right? That DNA gets translated into mRNA, and then that mRNA gets converted into the protein, right? It is possible to manipulate this at various stages, and you may have heard the term ASO. So it is possible to ASO, and ASOs are just one way to manipulate this, but this is technology that is available today, although there may not be an ASO for SYNGAP that is available to everyone just yet, but the technology to develop that is out there. You could have an ASO that modifies the mRNA so that you get a different protein, right? And SYNGAP is a mutation in just one copy of one gene, the SYNGAP1 gene. If you have even one copy of that gene that is bad, you could wind up with SYNGAP1 developmental epileptic encephalopathy, right? And so if you can alter that protein expression to fix that problem, that could be curative, right? That's the holy grail. That's what we want, right? Or if you can block the expression of that protein because you have another copy that is good, maybe that would be curative. These are theoretically possible. I'm not going to tell you that they are available today. I'm not going to tell you that they could be here tomorrow. I personally am hopeful, but again, I'm not an expert in this field. I don't know, and this is super complex stuff, but I think that super smart scientists involved in this research are almost there, right? And so, okay, diagnostic biomarkers. Well, we have those. We can sequence DNA. We can tell you if you have a mutation in the SYNGAP1 gene, right? Okay, so EEG is not going to be necessarily a diagnostic biomarker. Maybe it can contribute, but I think we have things there. However, this research is incredibly expensive, incredibly difficult, right? It's expensive in terms of time, in terms of expertise, in terms of all of the efforts that you have to go through. And then suppose you administer this therapy, suppose you develop something and you think this is going to work, you administer this therapy. How long is that trial going to last? If you administer this, are you going to wait for years to see if the child who got that therapy could walk or talk or do any of those things? No. Well, there are classes of biomarkers that are predictive or can be used for monitoring. So a predictive biomarker could tell you whether someone would respond to a treatment. Monitoring biomarkers could tell you if a therapy is working without having to wait years to see if someone can walk or talk when you expected they would not be able to. And that may be a place where EEG might fit in. I'm using the words maybe and might because we haven't proven this, but it's plausible. Then you all know this unfortunate truth about this type of therapy. It's risky. Okay, this is not risk-free stuff, right? These are injections into the brain, into the spinal fluid. This picture is actually from a disease that affects adult patients called Huntington's disease, but it is an ASO therapy. This is from an ASO trial in Huntington's disease. The top two rows are the MRI before the therapy, and the bottom are the same patient MRI after. And you may be able to appreciate the space within the brain, the white area, has enlarged. And that is a known risk in this type of therapy, and it can be life-threatening. Both adult patients and pediatric patients have died from these interventions, so this is not risk-free. So we need biomarkers that could monitor the therapy, could perhaps tell you which patients are the best candidates, could predict maybe if patients are at risk for these things. And then after the therapy may be used to monitor for safety, for signs that things are problematic. And I will tell you that EEG can, not always, though we don't do the quantification that would really improve this, but there are features of the EEG that do detect this enlargement of the center of the brain. This is called hydrocephalus. There are EEG features that are associated with this. So it is plausible that serial EEG monitoring could be a very good tool. In fact, there's pretty decent evidence that that's the case. All right. So I think there's very good rationale. We have to prove this, but there is very good rationale that for at least some types of monitoring, some types of biomarkers, EEG is a very good choice. All right. I know you guys are aware of this. This isn't surprising to you at all. But we don't actually, the surprising part might be that we don't actually have proof of this. We don't know for sure that EEG is definitively good. Interestingly, EEG monitoring is almost a de facto biomarker in this space already. Most trials with ASO therapy are going to need some degree of EEG. How much? We don't know. We don't know. Many trials have a little bit of EEG, and I just chose this picture because it's an interesting EEG feature that was chosen. This is actually in a mouse study, but in human trials of ASO, some degree of EEG is almost invariably obtained. But in the lab, you can use EEG as much as you want. You can actually permanently implant EEG, and you see all sorts of amazing things. In this case, this is in a mouse model of Angelman syndrome, which is another developmental epileptic encephalopathy. And Angelman syndrome does have well-characterized EEG biomarkers. I would say Angelman syndrome is ahead of all of the other DEEs in that sense, and it's going to help the Angelman community considerably, because now you have a biomarker that is well established, well characterized, and absolutely quantifiable. I'll show you a picture of what that looks like a little bit later. But basically, in this trial, they took mice that were so the black bars here are wild type mice, so that mice that don't have don't have the gene for Angelman's. The orange are mice that have been mutated to have the Angelman gene. And then the green bar is the mice with the Angelman gene who got an ASO therapy, and the blue bar, one type of ASO therapy, and then the blue is a second type of ASO therapy. So you can see that these mice are being monitored with EEG, and you don't have to just look for seizures and spikes and background slowing, right? Which they did in the study actually, and found similar features. But I think it's interesting that you can also use EEG to assess sleep, which is also impacted in all neurological diseases. And perhaps surprisingly, perhaps not, the sleep distribution in this neurological disease is very abnormal. And I will tell you that we've looked at this in other neurological conditions, in LGS, which is another DEE, and found a similar pattern. But basically, if you don't do anything, then the sleep is very disturbed with less REM sleep. So that's this drop here. But this is remarkable. The either ASO therapy, they both may be effective, reverse that, right? And this is something that you could monitor if you had adequate EEG monitoring. This required a lot of EEG monitoring. In fact, it required implanted EEG. But what if you could get EEG multiple times per week over several weeks to several months? Yeah, that could do it. Can we do that today? It's hard. But that's where we're going to get to our trial. Aren't there already EEG features in SYNGAP? I just said that Angelman is ahead of the curve because they have well-defined quantitative features, and SYNGAP does not. Wait a minute, but didn't I say earlier that there's good description of EEG features? Quantification is one thing to say, oh, we characterize a number of patients with SYNGAP and we found these features. That's one thing. Validation is another, and for that you need really big studies, and you really need to delve deeper. And there's great work in SYNGAP. This is that study from just this past year, 2024. Really interesting finding, but the important thing is this is only 36 patients, so this is still preliminary, but the findings are very interesting. A huge percentage of patients with SYNGAP have abnormalities in the background of the EEG. That's those slow waves I showed, the delta patterns that I showed. That is very common, and it does drop off as kids get older, but it remains commonly present. Epileptiform activity is commonly present, but initially it's more common in the back of the head, as I told you earlier. That's actually really interesting. That's not found in many conditions, but in SYNGAP, that is possibly a hallmark. But it starts to drop off as kids get older. So the older you get, the less likely you are to find that. However, the abnormalities are still there. They just shift more to the front of the head, front of temporal regions. And then there are other patterns as well that are seen in other DEEs. Those are present as well, becoming more common as you get older. Interestingly, these patterns aren't always there. And so this was done with continuous EEG. Could you find this with 20 minutes of EEG? Most of these patterns, no, they're not that common. All right, so problems to overcome. What if we wanted to do a study and establish biomarkers? Well, we can look at retrospective data. That would be all the data from the EEGs your kids have already had. So let's say we got you all together and said, hey, everyone go out and get your EEG on disk. That is easier said than done. That's actually a really hard thing to do. Some of you have tried this and you know how much of a battle it is. People don't know how to put the EEG on a disk or a USB stick. They don't want to send it out, even though they're required to. You get the EEG back and it's some format that nobody can open because it's some crazy ancient EEG machine that nobody has the software for. Happens all the time. Even if you could get all of those EEGs, the problem is, number one, often it's awake EEG. You went to the EEG lab and you got 20 minutes of EEG, and that was it. But awake EEG is often impacted by artifacts. Sleep EEG is great if we got a 24-hour EEG, but 24-hour EEG is expensive and hard to get. Your kids don't like this. How many of you have gone for a 24-hour EEG and your kids ripped off the electrodes? Well, some of you I know before they walked out the door, but definitely by the time they got home, right? That happens. That happens. EEG is annoying. The other thing is when you get an EEG, it's probably not on a good day. It's probably on a bad day, because I am probably not going to order an EEG if you came in and said, hey, things are going really well. Why waste your money, the insurance company's money, your time, my time, everyone's time? I'm not going to do that. But those are probably the days that we want EEG. Hey, this is what your kid's brain looks like when everything is good. How come we don't get that? Unfortunately, it's tough in the real world. You got to justify these, and that's not something that's going to be justifiable. All right, well, what about a prospective study? Yeah, that's actually what we want, but it's expensive. EEG techs are few, and there's a huge demand, and they are stuffed into the hospital running around doing EEGs on the people who are coming in emergency situations, which includes you guys when things are going poorly and you go to the emergency room. They are not around sitting there just ready to do a research study on families who are having a good day, right? So it's going to be hard to do a prospective study. We all know that. And EEG is limited. Even if we could do this, even if we had the techs and the machines and cost wasn't a factor, not everywhere has an EEG. Some of you would have to travel really far to get that EEG done, right? Some of you conveniently located in this big city and you can just go down the street, but not everyone. And any study we do can't just be on a few people. We need lots and lots of data. These machine learning models that I'm going to talk about in a second, they eat data. And we need lots of data, not just from a few people. We need diversity of people too. A model is going to be totally useless if it's based off of 36 people. But if it is based off of hundreds of people from various backgrounds, with all sorts of different mutations, all sorts of different disease progression, just the entire spectrum of SYNGAP, then we can build tools that are going to be helpful for everyone. And that's the only way. And then finally, the biggest problem of all, me, right? You don't want me looking at this data. I'm not good. I'm not good. And when I say me, I'm not good, but I'm gonna like spread that blame to your neurologist too. None of us are good, right? And if anyone is out there, you know, if there are some neurologists on this call and they're like, what is he saying? I am awesome. That guy's terrible, but I'm awesome. I challenge you. I'll give you a 24-hour EEG. You grade it. If you're out there saying that, I challenge you to grade something, and we'll put you up against the machine and see how you do. Okay. So with machines, you can take this, you can identify little features, and the machine can analyze thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, perhaps billions of features and do it super quickly. All right. That's the beauty of machine learning. That's really what machine learning is doing, right? Don't ask me how it's working in great detail, because I don't actually know. It's a black box. I don't know what it's doing, but I can tell you that it could be calculating all of these parameters or some of these parameters or some combinations of parameters or things that I don't even know are there, right? It could be calculating lots of different mathematical things and then spitting it out and saying, yes, this is a discharge, this is a discharge, but this is not a discharge, right? And the really cool thing is if you train it well, it will be the average of all 8 of those epileptologists. It will perform at the level of however many people you want to average together. So in a way, it's better than any one person. It's as good as all of the people, right? And that's if you get enough data to make those models. And it's not just epileptiform discharges, of course. You can have machine learning models score all sorts of things, background, seizures, periodic discharge, all of those different features. And you can even have machine learning tools score things that I don't appreciate at all. Things that we may not know are in the EEG could be scoreable, right? Some of these models can actually take EEG and say, this person with SYNGAP has a predicted disease course that is good, bad, something. And it can't tell you why, but it is trained on hundreds of patients and thousands or tens of thousands of EEG data points. And it may be able to do that. And that's really where we need to get. And it's possible. It is possible. with enough data. All right, so very briefly, Beacon, what do? We try to fill in those gaps. We analyze data. We build machine learning tools. We iterate back and forth with human experts. So we have ways to provide that data to human neurologists, and then they look at the model outputs and they say, yeah, this worked, this didn't work. And then integrate that with other data, your child's neuropsych testing, your seizure diary reports. All of those can go into this flywheel and help us to develop the models we need. And I'm going to come back to this component here, which is the heart of the study that we are proposing. We have done this before. We took a huge data set. Each one of these dots is 24, 48, or 72-hour EEG across many, many patients. This is SCN2A. And the colors here represent seizures, and we can quantify lots of things, seizures, spikes. And in conjunction with Citizen, by the way, phenomenal efforts. They're really doing some amazing things. So if you're not signed up for Citizen, please do so. It's really, really helpful for the development of this type of effort. But with that Citizen data, which is not the perfect data, but it's very good data, and we don't have the perfect data, which is EEG data on your best days and your worst days. But with data collected by Citizen, we were able to build a model that actually I think is very interesting. What you're looking at is a predictive model of gross motor deficit. So things like, can you throw a ball? Can you walk? Based on EEG collected early in life. And this is a model built off of the number, essentially the density of epileptiform discharges, or the burden of epileptiform discharges. How many, how frequently, how closely spaced are they? And if your burden is very high, and you have a gain of function mutation, so your sodium channels like to pop open, then you are more likely to have a gross motor deficit, more likely to not be able to walk, more likely to not be able to throw a ball. Whereas if you don't have a high epileptiform discharge burden, the probability is much, much lower that you're going to have those deficits. So this could be useful. Right now, let's say there is an ASO therapy that's been developed. Let's say it is risky. Let's say that you want to identify people who are more likely to have problems as the people who are going to participate earliest in the trial, right? And those are not what ifs, those are all true statements. Well, this could be a way of selecting patients who are the most at risk, who for whom the risk is not so severe, because if you do nothing, they're the ones who are going to be the most impacted, right? Clearly, EEG has potential. And there's another interesting thing here. It turns out this is true for the mutations in which it's a gain of function, but if it's a loss of function, those sodium channels don't want to open up, then the spike burden isn't a good marker. Maybe for these patients, it's you need to look somewhere else. And that can be the case, right? EEG is not going to be useful for everyone, but for some people it is. And this is what we need for SYNGAP, something like this. Okay, we built this model. Here are the EEG features that are helpful. We can predict with so much accuracy who's going to do poorly, who's not. And that can help us assess who really should be in the initial trials for ASO therapy, the high-risk trials for ASO therapy. We can assess if the therapy is working, right? Imagine that someone gets an ASO therapy and they were up here, but now they are moving down here. We will know that within hours, because you just collect that EEG and we'll know that, as opposed to years to find out, hey, 2 years later, are you walking, right? That's what we want to get to. All right, coming back to that headband that I showed you before, we think this is going to be part of the answer, or at least it's going to be helpful. What is this thing? And I got mine right here. It is, I don't know if you can see me, it is an EEG headband. All right. Actually, let me go to the next page. If you look at the inside of it, actually, I'm going to put it on. If you can see me, I'm putting on. That's it. I just put it on. It is on. All right. If you look at the inside, you'll see these little plastic discs. These are EEG electrodes, and they're dry EEG electrodes. Here's the key part, dry. They're not like what you get when you go to the doctor, where the tech is scrubbing skin and putting this goo on, right? The fact that these are dry is why you can just slip this on, and I would just push this button, and I am collecting EEG. That's it. Well, I'd have to push it 3 times, but anyway, you get the picture. Super simple to get EEG. There are pluses and minuses to this. One obvious negative is when you go to the doctor and the doctor orders an EEG, you're going to have wires all over the head. So this is supposed to be the head, nose up here, here's the ears. You get wires all over that. You've seen this. Your kids have had this. Wires all over the place. That's a lot of data, and it's useful. This only has 4 EEG electrodes. There's a whole bunch of, you can see that there's 4 up here and 2 back here, so it looks like there's 6. But there are only 4 channels. Just take my word for it. There's only 4. Okay. And they only cover a certain number of spots of the brain. Okay. So one trade-off is you have a lower density of channels. So you have to be asking the right questions if you're going to use this. But what's the upshot? The upshot is you don't need an EEG technologist, right? We think anyone can operate this. And this is actually a friend of ours who is operating it on their son with SYNGAP. So we think anyone can operate the device, and we think kids with SYNGAP will tolerate it. Now, this particular friend of ours is quite sophisticated, and maybe they have extra good skills with manipulating medical technology. But we think that you don't have to have any skills. We think that anyone can use this. Not only can anyone use this, we're very excited about this in SYNGAP in particular, because I already told you this. In SYNGAP, what you find is you find abnormalities in the back of the brain, in the back of the head, in the occipital region, which is right here, and the frontotemporal regions, which is up here. We cover those areas. Yes, we don't have that many electrodes, but for SYNGAP, we probably have the perfect set of electrodes. So we're very excited about running this trial in SYNGAP in particular. And we do think with these 4 electrodes, we can assess overall background organization. So these are the things we want to see. All right, so the study. Let me get into that. It's not going to be very long. It's not a very complicated study. This is a usability study. The main thing we want to see is, can you guys use this on your kids? And I'm saying kids in quotes, right? It could be a sibling, it could be a loved one, somebody you take care of who has SYNGAP. Okay. So you, the caretaker, can you have somebody with SYNGAP? Can you put this on somebody with SYNGAP? And then will they keep it on, and can we record some brain activity? That's what we want to see. The goal is to see, out of 10 possible nights, how many can you do? And then how good is the quality? All right. And then, of course, as exploratory things, we are going to look for biomarkers in that data. But that's not the main goal of this initial study. This is a usability study. Can you even do this? We're looking to try to recruit somewhere between 24 and 30 participants. I want it to be closer to the high end. I have no objection to going over that. Obviously, it's expensive, so cost will eventually become an issue. But that's sort of the ballpark number of people we need. Ages 8 and up, there's going to be a caveat later, but right now, ages 8 and up. And I do want adults. So we want some number to be over 18, and then some number to be 8 to 10, and adolescents, and then 12 to 18. But I think we're really going to try to get in everyone who's eligible. We're trying to try to get them in who's interested. Stay tuned. Sorry, this should be 6. May reduce to 6 and up, but that is not the case today. You'll need to have an Android or Apple cell phone and home Wi-Fi, which I think everyone has. We may be able to help with home Wi-Fi if you don't have that, but your cellular connection is not good enough. You can't just have your mobile cell phone. It has to be Wi-Fi. And the reason is, I don't know if it's security or data volume, but it has to be over Wi-Fi. Your phone has to be connected to Wi-Fi. And then your loved one with SYNGAP has to have a genetic diagnosis of SYNGAP, which I think everyone on this webinar will have had. And obviously you'll have to have some note that says, yes, SYNGAP gene has a mutation. Either 2 or more seizures a week, or global developmental delay needing 24-hour care, either of those 2 things. Note metal implants in the skull, such as a neuropace RNS or surgical staples or a cochlear implant. It's safe, but it could interfere with the signal. And for this study, we just want no metal implants. In the future, those may not be exclusions, but right now those are exclusions. I don't know. I don't think that would affect many people, given that the RNS isn't generally implanted in smaller children. Because of our IRB, you have to be within the continent. Sorry, actually, I don't even know if continental is required. You have to be within the United States during participation. I don't think continental is even, but you could be in Alaska or Hawaii. And participation is about 2 weeks, as I said. And you can't plan on being hospitalized. So obviously emergencies come up, but you can't, for example, have a plan to go to the epilepsy monitoring unit during your 2 weeks of monitoring. We can deal with it if some emergency comes up, but no planned hospitalization. The study itself is pretty straightforward. 15-minute Zoom call with me, and I'll send out a calendar link in the very near. We're still organizing our internal teams to handle this. It's taking a little bit longer. I had said I wanted to get started in the first week of February, but we're almost already the end of the first week of February. We're close though. So pretty soon, a number of you have already expressed interest. You'll be getting follow-up emails from me, but please contact me, and you'll hear how shortly. If you're interested in this, you'll get an email. You can contact me. I'll send you a calendar invite. Really quick call. We'll go over the details of the study again. You'll ask any questions you want, and we'll do an informed consent form, which you can just sign digitally. I'll email it to you, and we'll have you sign it. We'll send you a training video. It's optional. It's really quick. We'll mail you the headband and some instructions. You'll download the app from the Play Store or the Apple Store. There are online surveys that will be emailed to you, and then you apply the device to your loved one for 5 consecutive nights, 2 nights off, and then again for 5 consecutive nights. And then you'll return the headband to us in a prepaid mailer. There's no cost to you except for your time involved in the surveys and everything. And then you may have to go to UPS or FedEx to drop the box off, but the postage will be paid for. We do pay $100 for all the surveys if you complete all the surveys, and I think it's like you lose like $10 if you miss some surveys. Pretty lenient about that. And then $100 if you attempt to complete all the nights. Even if you try and you can't do it, you get credit. I'll go over the specific payment details. Again, this is not to incentivize you. This is to account for the time and effort you're putting in. We aren't reimbursing for any medical issues that arise. So if a seizure occurs, obviously you can't bill that to the study. You have to go through your regular health insurance. There's no direct benefit to you or your loved one. You're not going to get the data back, okay? The benefit comes from the idea that this could help in drug development for everyone. So it's sort of a altruistic goal. We're trying to help everyone. You yourself will not be a benefit because we won't send you in fact, we won't even know whose data is who. It's all anonymized. So we can't tell you about your data because we don't know what your data is. The aggregate data, the anonymized data, though, will go to the pharma consortium, our partners who are pharmaceutical companies who are developing ASO therapies. SRF's getting the data, and then obviously Beacon, and all of us are going to be working on biomarker development of this data. I am very bullish on this because, as I told you, we've already done this study in Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, which is another type of DEE, and there were some kids with SYNGAP in that study, and they tolerated the headband. So I'm I think it's very likely this will succeed. All right. Obviously, we want to know for sure, but I have very high hopes. Super quickly, because I know I'm out of time, just some data from the headband. You'll have to take my word for it. This is indeed awake EEG. This is a sibling, a neurotypical sibling of one of our participants, and this looks like awake EEG, called normal. Here's some EEG. This is actually the seizure. It might start here, but definitely you can see these are individual epileptiform discharges. The seizure is definitely back here. It's more obvious if I zoomed out. You'll have to take my word for it, but this is a clear-cut seizure that was recorded. So yes, the headband can detect seizures. We need to do more testing to know, will it detect all seizures? I don't know, but it certainly can detect some seizures. This is an interesting pattern. This is the pathognomonic, the definitive pattern, the biomarker, if you will, in Angelman syndrome. So I told you Angelman syndrome does have a biomarker. This is it. All right, so we can detect that on this headband. It actually is runs of epileptiform discharges, but the way they organize is it's called the term for it is Notch delta. It's classic for Angelman syndrome. This is called paroxysmal fast activity. It is a feature that is seen in a variety of DEEs, including SYNGAP, and clearly we can pick it up with this headband. So I'm very hopeful. I think that the headband is going to be able to identify known biomarkers. Plus, the headband can assess sleep features, which is also a set of biomarkers. So I think there's a lot of potential for biomarkers in SYNGAP and other DEEs. I mentioned that we did this in LGS. A lot of interesting results came out. The main one was parents could use it. They're not just parents, caregivers. Caregivers could use it, and they successfully, almost everyone in the study got at least 6 nights of 6 out of 10 nights of very high quality data. So it worked. In LGS, we did acquire EEG. In the participants who had epilepsy, all but one of them had clearly epileptic features, either discharges or seizures, and all of them had abnormalities. Every single person who had epilepsy had an abnormality on their EEG. One caveat that I wasn't super excited about: most of the caregivers had this 80% orange. These are people who self-express their technological know-how as pretty high level. These are people who feel comfortable with technology. I'm hoping that you will sign up even if you don't feel comfortable with technology. I want more people who are in this blue area. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know. I barely know how to turn on a cell phone. Great, sign up. We want to make sure you can use this because I really think you will be able to, and we'll help you. But in the LGS study, most people said, yeah, I'm pretty good with cell phone. Features that we found in LGS, yeah, here's the paroxysmal fast activity I mentioned. These are epileptiform discharges out here. We also found very prominent sleep abnormalities. This was already pointed out in that prior study I mentioned in the ASO therapy. Significant reductions in REM. There were abnormalities in time awake after, probably because of seizures. Sleep cycling was abnormal. There are a lot of different features that were abnormal in kids with DEE. This probably also impacts daytime behavior. So there's a lot of different biomarkers of interest here. A lot of rich data that we think could be useful across the board, not just for drug development, also for clinical care. So I think this could be really helpful. Not at the individual level today, but when we finish these set of studies, I think it'll be helpful for everyone. Most critical feature, though, is there's a lot of variability in sleep. So you do need multiple nights. That's why I think this headband is better than going to see your doctor and having your doctor prescribe a technologist applied clinical EEG. That is not something you're going to get twice a week for 3 weeks. But this headband is something you could do twice a week for 3 weeks. And when you get that much data, it's a lot more for some of these biomarkers. At AES this past year, we presented this data. I am looking forward to presenting this as a SYNGAP study in the upcoming AES. That's the goal. So that's why I'm hopeful that you guys will be interested in sign up. This is presented by not just Beacon. This has been efforts of SRF, Beacon, and then possibly 4 partners, but definitely 3, who I will be able to name shortly, but I couldn't name them specifically today. But they're very interested. One of them is already signed. The others are in we're going through the business side, but the science teams are very excited. All right, I'm going to put this slide up, but the SRF team is going to send out information. They're going to put this on the website. This is the email that you can send an email to. If you already have sent an email, you can send us another email, but I probably already have your contact information. I'm just delinquent in sending you the sign up, but feel free to send me another email at this address. You can email me directly if you'd like. This goes to the entire study team. So feel free to let us know. And even if you're not sure if you're eligible, let me know. We can go over the eligibility and determine if you're eligible. Looking for as many people who are available to sign up. Please do so. And this is the first of many studies. So if it fills up, if you're not eligible, don't worry. We are trying to expand the study in the near future. We will have international sites. The ages will be a little bit broader. So always keep in touch. We're definitely recruiting. All right, I'm going to stop there. I apologize. I am over, and I did want to take questions. So team, please let me know.
Oh, Jay, thank you so much. I have goosebumps. I'm so excited about this. It's something that we have been talking about for a while, and it's just so exciting to see that it's starting. So that data you showed was gorgeous. It feels like this usability study is just step one, and yeah, and we just can't wait. We do have one question in the Q&A. Olga Bodie says, what's the oldest SYNGAP child who has successfully used this device?
There is no upper limit. I know of someone who's in their 60s. I think Mike once told me that was the oldest patient who you guys had in the community. Great. There's no upper limit. In fact, there's a number of studies this device is being used for, and it's being used in elderly Alzheimer's patients. That actually is a pretty big target population. So absolutely no upper limit. And one of our pharma partners is very interested in adults with SYNGAP. So I would not put an upper age. And I'm just gonna, you didn't ask this, but I'm gonna mention the other side of that, the flip of that. What's the youngest patient? Personally, obviously, I think there should be no low. I want to newborn should be able to have this. The problem is today we don't have multiple sizes of the headband, so the age is actually restricted because of that. It's a one size fits all, and then we do have a compression head sweatband that like squeezes it down, but we don't think it will fit. Certainly under 6, we don't think it'll fit. So that's why there's a lower limit. That is going to be solved in future iterations. So we are working on version 2, and we're actually working on version 3. Version 2 is already heading to production. We're working on version 3, and then there will be new sizes, but until that comes out, I won't be able to offer this to kids under 6.
Okay, great. That's really good to hear that the Dreem band has been used in all kinds of ages already. Maybe not necessarily SYNGAP patients, but definitely older people, older adults.
Yeah, older adults, and as I said, one of our pharma partners is specifically interested in adults.
Right. Let's see, our clinical director, Marta Dehia, was asking if the EEG abnormalities become more frontal with age. Do you think we can see any correlation to behaviors or other aspects of the disease, any disease progression? Do you think this is well, first off, did this surprise you? Did it surprise you that it changed? And do you think this has to do with puberty? Do you think this has to do with maturation? Do you think it has to do with changing behaviors potentially? Or do you have any? I know you're probably going to say we get too soon to tell, but what's your instinct?
The answer to all of those questions was yes. It was surprising, and the EEG definitely evolves, and that's true across many different DEs. In LGS, in fact, you can reach an age at which the EEG can not quite, but almost look visually, it'll look normal. But if you do spectral analysis, there'll be abnormalities. So we know the EEG goes through maturation processes in everyone, regardless of any underlying neurological disorder. So the fact that it changed didn't surprise me at all. But the fact that it shifted locations is very interesting. I did not expect that. And I probably should have, because I'm guessing Marta is alluding to, we know that in SYNGAP, there is this really interesting pattern where you can get chewing-induced seizures. And in these chewing-induced seizures, what you'll often see is they look like eye blinks, but they aren't necessarily. They may be frontal epileptiform discharges. So I should have known that frontal abnormalities were present, but I didn't know that they weren't present earlier. So based on that, I do think they're probably going to be associated with behavioral changes, but whether it's going to be behavior in the sense of behavioral outbursts or anger outbursts, I don't know. I suspect sleep changes are going to be more linked to that, if I had to guess. But certainly behavior in the sense of seizures induced by chewing or flashing lights or something like that. I think that is probably going to be correlated with the shift in the EEG patterns. I wasn't expecting the shift, by the way. I think that's very interesting. In fact, I'm not 100% convinced that'll pan out when we get bigger studies, but I won't be surprised if it does pan out.
Okay, great. I was wondering if you wanted to go over kind of the time that you think you said when I was looking at the study design, you
Mhm.
had the discussion and consent, and then there were some survey one or more surveys, and then there's the putting on the EEG every night for a few nights, and then waiting, and then a few more nights. So, can you just discuss the amount of time you think the surveys will take?
Oh yeah, yeah. Let me go back. So there are the total of I think it's a total of exactly 11 surveys. There's a survey before you start, which is that's the longest one. It's like a demographics, your age, your again, I'm going to use the word child, but it doesn't have to be your child, sibling, the person you're taking care of, their age, and then it does ask a bunch of like it's going to ask for medications, it's going to ask for uh, all the medical problems that person has. It's going to ask questions about other people in your family. That survey is probably about 15 minutes, I'm going to guess. And it's right online. So a lot of the questions are multiple choice or multi-choice. So you would select SYNGAP, epilepsy, and then there might be some other questions in there as well. That's going to be the one before you ever start. Then each night for 5 consecutive nights, you're supposed to have your, again, child in quotes, your child wear the device. So you're going to try to have your child wear the device. That may be hard. We know some kids will take to it, and some it's going to be a battle. You may have to wait till your kid falls asleep and then slip it on. We've had parents do that. In that case, it could take a while, right? That could be 20 minutes of effort right there. If your kid doesn't mind it at all, it might be 1 minute of effort, right? Like, look, this is in the ideal world, this is how long it takes to get it to work. So I'm holding my headband, I slipped it on, that's it, right? That's the ideal world. Now you're not going to be in the ideal world. You know that for a fact, but if there's not too much of a battle, it could be as short as a minute. So that part I don't know. The surveys after each night of recording are anywhere from 1 minute. Some of them are just overnight, like basically what happened overnight. So it's about 5 or 6 questions that are sort of multiple choice. Did you have any problems with the headband? If yes, was it one of these things? If no, then you don't have to do anything. And then there'll be a question that's basically a diary. It's basically describe any events that might have happened overnight that you noted. Were there any seizures, that sort of thing. So that survey could take 5 to 10 minutes if there was a lot of things to describe. Oh, my kid had 17 seizures, 5 at 11 p.m. and 1 at midnight. That's going to take a lot longer to fill out. If nothing happened and you got it to work, then it could be as short as a minute. At the end of each of these 5-night blocks, there's a longer survey that asks about your kids' anxiety levels, behavioral problems. And so that survey is probably adds about 10 minutes to, so there's an additional 10-minute survey here and an additional 10-minute survey here. So I'm going to peg the time commitment to anywhere from 5 to 30 minutes per day. The outer edge of that is really if you have to do a lot of battling to get the headband on, and if a lot of things happen that you wanted to describe.
Okay, great. That sounds really reasonable. Thank you. And what about let's say we have a kid we check on in the night and we notice it's like not in the right place and we stick it back on. That's a reasonable, this isn't a like one-time feasibility usability study. It could be readjusted, put back on.
Yep. And there are actually sensors that determine if it's fallen off the head. We won't tell you. We're not going to call you in the middle of the night. But that's something we're looking at. That's actually one of our questions. How often does it fall off in the middle of the night?
Mhm.
And you don't even have to put it back on. It'd be great if you did, but you don't have to. You get credit for trying, right? Some nights you might try, and you fail. You still get credit for that. But on a night that you did get it on and it slips off, that's okay. In fact, we expect that. It's going to happen sometimes.
Okay, and then I know a lot of our kids, it takes them a while to warm up to something new. So I'm wondering about kind of using it during the day for a few days before trying it at night.
Yep.
Do you have any, do you have any guidance around that? Are there any no-nos around that? Do you?
Nope. We actually encourage that. So in the video, it talks about this a little bit, some tips and tricks, which actually members of the SRF board actually came up with the tips and tricks for this. So I think they're going to be really good. And they include it's things like exactly what you just said, right? What was the term that was used? Acclimatization. It's a fancy word, but basically exactly what you said. You're welcome to have your child wear it during the day for an hour. You're welcome to put it on yourself and show your child that it's not a big deal. Just let us know if you want some extra time. So what we do is we mail these out to you. And if you know you want to do that, what we might do is we might mail it a week early and have you do that. And then you could say, yeah, send it out to me. But I don't plan on starting to record until February 14th, something like that. So absolutely something you could do.
Okay, great. Let me just check. Okay, here we go. So there's another question from Julie Miles. She says, please forgive me if this was asked. Will the device be connected to our phones through an app? So yeah, can
Yes.
you describe the app a little? I guess we download it from, you talked about downloading it either from the Apple Store or the Google Play Store.
Yep. That's exactly right. So the way the headband works is actually this headband can connect to our server. It does the data is temporarily stored on the headband, but obviously all the machine learning algorithms are super complex. So they can't operate on this device. So the data is sent back to our server when you plug it into charge. So there's enough space on here to store about a day of data. So you could probably get 2 or 3 nights on here, but that's not what we want you to do. So what we want you to do is basically use your phone to control this device. And actually, the reason for your phone and the app is that there's no screen on the headband, right? There's no like visual feedback on the headband itself, but the app will tell you what's going on. This app will tell you, hey, you have the headband on upside down, or the headband is not in contact with the skin well enough. It's too loose. So the app, if you have the app, it will tell you that, and then you can adjust things to try to get it operational, and then you can hit start recording, and it'll kick off the headband. The truth of the matter is, you could actually do everything from the headband alone without the app, but we don't want you to do that because then you won't know if it's working or not. The other piece is you need the app to pair the headband to your home Wi-Fi, right? So the way it's working is the app connects to the headband through Bluetooth. This is a lot of technical details. You don't have to know this, but just so you've heard it, in case you're technical and you want to know this, your phone and the app will connect to the headband through Bluetooth, and it will send instructions to the headband. In other words, it'll basically tell the headband, hey, my home network name is Jay's house, and my password is 1234. And then the headband can then get on your Wi-Fi. And once that happens, then the headband can stream the data once it's done recording.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, that's really amazing. Thanks for answering, for asking that question, Julie. That was a fun bit of answer. I understand it better now. Jay, did you have any questions you thought we would ask that we haven't asked yet?
Yes, I have several questions. I think some of them were asked, so that's great. Let's see. Your child got upset and threw the headband into a wall. It's broken. Will I be charged? This happened. Definitely. You're going to be charged. No, of course not. There's no charge for you whatsoever. We would appreciate it if you don't destroy the headbands, but if it happens, it happens. And actually, we want to know that, right? That's important information for us. If we're going to do this in the future for a big ASO trial, then this helps us to know how many extra headbands we're going to need. Yeah, 10% of the kids will destroy them. Oh, okay. let's make sure we bill 10% extra. So no charge, period. We live in some country that is not the United States. Can we participate? Unfortunately, no, not at this time. And that is currently two limitations. One is our IRB. But I did find out that we can change the IRB. It's a little bit expensive for us, but we can change it. The other thing, though, is a regulatory piece. We need a specific approval for different regions of the world. We are working on EU. We actually have, I think we might have clinical approval in the EU, but we need, there's a couple pieces we need for EU. Work on Australia. Canada is on our list, but that is the least far along. South America, I don't. So basically nowhere outside of the US is currently available, but we're working on that. If you are not a US citizen / permanent resident, can you participate? Absolutely. That does not matter at all. But you do have to be in the US because of our IRB regulations. This was asked, if your child is over 18, can you participate? Absolutely. We do want to try to distribute all the people so we get all of these age brackets covered. But my guess is we won't have enough adults. That's what I predict. So if you have an adult Syngapian, I think that we will be begging you to participate. This one's a little tricky. If your child is less than 8, this came up at the conference as well in December. So we absolutely have an interest in getting as young as we can get down to, but we don't know if the headband is going to fit under 8. I think it might, but I don't know for sure. And our IRB doesn't allow us to have you do measurements of head circumference, which is tricky. I'm sure you've gone to the doctor. 1 week your head circumference is 45, and the next week it's 52, right? It's hard to get a head circumference. Kids move around. So right now, our IRB consent form is 8 and above, but the IRB actually is okay with testing it out on younger kids. So for the initial phase of the study, it'll be 8 and over, but I won't be the least bit surprised if we drop it to 6 and 7-year-olds as well. I don't see any future for this study where we offer it to kids under 6, to be honest with you. But 6 and 7-year-olds, good chance. Stay tuned. I will let you guys know about that. How long will the study last? Until we get the number of people. I'm guessing 3 months. That's very optimistic, but the level of enthusiasm was super extraordinary. In fact, I think we had more than 30 people already signed up, but not everyone who signed up. I already know for a fact that many of the people who wanted to participate aren't going to be eligible because their kids were too young. And a number of people at the conference are not in the US, so may not be eligible, though again, we are working on those regulations so that can change and maybe they will become eligible. I think this is the last question I was going to answer, or I was anticipating. If you can't participate in this study, and you know that there's going to be more, but if I can't participate in this study, will I be excluded from future Dreem studies? Absolutely not. In fact, we won't know who participated. Remember, once you participated, it's anonymized. Your data just becomes a number. So if you don't get into this study, stay tuned. We're going to do this is just the first of studies. Obviously, there won't be studies if we find out that nobody can wear the headband. That's important information too. But I don't think that's likely. So I do anticipate there's going to be more studies. Not being in this first one doesn't matter.
Well, great. I am not seeing any more questions or chat. And so I want to thank you so much. What a fantastic presentation. It was very clear, great slides, and we are so excited to move forward with Beacon and the pharma partners in getting a biomarker. So it's a huge priority for Syngap Research Fund and our community, and we're just so glad that you're an amazing partner in this. Thank you.
Oh, thank you guys. As you guys know, I always love talking with Team Syngap. super looking forward to next year's conference. Atlanta, everyone. So I am super enthusiastic about presenting some data then, although you may get it earlier because obviously SRF is instrumental to this study and is also going to be getting the data. But we'll do something at the conference. We'll present the data. We'll show some good stuff.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. I'm glad you were here today. Bye.
Wow.